there's a lot of colleagues I know that had similar strong feelings about certain things like natural resources and development and things like that and being against it. So for you, if you were to have a one-on-one or kind of heart to heart with someone, what are some of the things that you would say or share to kind of bridge that gap and find that common understanding?
Yeah, I think like in a one-liner, I could say that the people who work in the forest care more about the forest than anyone else I've ever met in my life. And I'm personally invested in the forest that I manage. Every time I see a tree that I planted myself, I just want to hug it, you know. But I think like the realization that wood is a renewable resource and it's an excellent choice for building and so many other things that we use every day. Uh, to be able to make sure that it's a sustainable product and comes from a well-managed forest, to me, is worth more than putting a hands-off approach to forests. So realizing that managing forests makes them valuable will help them stay as forests. So forestry is about keeping forests as forests. And to me, that seems like a pretty big mind shift from what I thought when I was a kid. The definition of old growth itself is complicated. So that varies by species of tree and types of forest. So for example, tree species like poplar does not live longer than 120 years. So to protect old growth poplar forest, which is like 40% of the forest that I manage, does not mean that they will be very old and they're going to fall down pretty soon, you know, and start over on their own. The old growth debate that's mostly taking place in Western Canada right now is one that I don't honestly know much about, but in my scope, when I find forest areas that exhibit characteristics of old growth forests, I'm absolutely protecting those because that is uncommon for this area because of the history of logging that was just like in the beginning, they thought the forests were going to last forever and there was no such thing as sustainable forest management. So we don't have a lot of those areas that have those huge trees and the what's called pit and mound topography. So evidence of old trees falling over, they leave that root mass, it decomposes, and there's a hole where it used to be. Things that your forester eye are looking for. When I see that, yeah, that's going in my inventory as potential old growth area. That is something we're doing. And that's also, there's a very, I don't know the percentage offhand, but the percentage of forests in Ontario and in Canada that's protected through parks and conservation areas, that's where a lot of the old growth is. And like I mentioned before, if we're protecting all old growth, then we are limiting the availability of other forest types, ages, and diversity is important because no tree lives forever. They all eventually fall down. And if we are just letting every forest age on its own, we're creating increased fire risk and also increased carbon emissions. Young forests store more carbon than older forests that are starting to fall down, decompose, release that carbon. So to me, all types of forests are important. Protecting old growth is important, but it is unrealistic to manage all forests for old growth and also not natural. So if you've already done a degree of some kind, most of those would probably set you up to do a 1 or 2 years master program. So the University of Toronto and some other universities that I'm not as familiar with do have like a Master's of Forest Conservation that is accredited. So if you're willing to go back to school, you can like get that done in a year. And then you don't just like, oh, I graduated, I'm at RPF now. You have to get 18 months of relevant work experience, get a mentor and some sponsors, go through the process. It's like pretty intense. However, it's definitely possible, worthwhile. And even if you wanted to get your foot in the door and you're looking for like more field work, forest technician program is like a year at Algonquin College. Which is an accelerated program, and you get a diploma of forest technician certificate. Even, like a lot of people do tree planting in the summer. It's kind of seasonal work. But yeah, if you want to like progress into a career, the credentials matter a bit to get that base knowledge of forestry. But even like science and technology is a huge thing that's growing in forestry. So there's people who work in forestry that don't have forestry backgrounds, but they're helping develop new technologies for wood use, mass timber, and like biochemicals and biomass are huge topics right now. Even climate change science, that all kind of weaves in to forestry. So there's a lot of directions that you could take.
Awesome. I love that. Yeah. And I second what Perry was saying too. Now I'm just like, oh, like I want to go into forestry now.
Give me a call. We can chat.
Yeah, I'll do that. We've got another question in the Q&A here. What's the most interesting or alarming fake news story that you've responded to?
Well, something that's been near and dear to me over the years, because I live right next door to it, is there's been a lot of groups that have tried to put a stop to logging in Algonquin Park over the years. And what people don't realize is that Algonquin Park was created as a timber reserve to prevent farms and development from encroaching into that area, to protect the trees because they were valuable to the forest sector. So it's been logged since the 1800s, and most people would not even know that as they're on their canoe trip through the park, because there's so many levels of protection in place to make sure that recreationalists and wildlife and all the other values are not impacted in a negative way through forest management. They have the highest forest management standards, I would argue, of anywhere in Canada. And I find it interesting that maybe someone who's never been there before is highly offended by the fact that there's management happening in Algonquin Park. And really, the ecological processes are being better carried out through forestry than if you just put a buffer around the whole thing, because like I said, fires aren't allowed to burn. People would be at risk if there was no fire suppression in Algonquin Park. So yeah, I think it's one of those things that it comes up every few years. It really bugs me because I have worked there, and I've seen like the level of care that goes into the forestry there. And it's like, I wish that people could just see it for themselves, and then maybe they wouldn't feel the way they do. A couple things. People is the number one thing. So people moving around more. A lot of like the invasive insects that are affecting trees it's people moving firewood around. But it gets to Canada because we are like a global market now. So one little larvae in a crate on a ship emerging when it arrived in Detroit led to emerald ash borer exploding in North America. But someone's tree on their lawn in Toronto dies, and they cut it up and bring it to firewood at the cottage in Golden Lake, an hour away from here, and that's how it gets here. So just like that lack of awareness of human impact in just moving things around, and even on the plant front, invasive plants. So someone hiking around in Southern Ontario in their local forest, their boots are storing seeds for invasive plant species that exist down there that we don't have yet. So just being aware that like your dog's fur, your ATV tires, your boots, your firewood, all that stuff is vectors for moving around invasive species. The second thing is climate change, for sure. The climate is different now than it was even 20 years ago. We don't have as many extended extreme cold periods in a lot of areas, and that would have killed off some of these species in the past. So like black-legged ticks, never would have thought of that 15 years ago when I started working in forestry. Now I have to every day put gaiters on and do a tick check when I get out of the woods. It's just changing environment, and there's a lot of things. It's like a perfect storm. So, but the number one thing is like, this is something that people can help a lot with by just being conscious that you are the one who's moving this stuff around. So I do the same. I clean my boots between forests now if there's seeds that I need to be worried about transferring, and also learning to identify this kind of stuff. so that you know if you're in an area that has it and you can report it. There's a app called EDD Maps in most provinces. And if you see like garlic mustard, a harmful plant, you can take a picture of it, load it on there on your cell phone, and then somebody might be able to do something about it. Or you can just pull it out, take it with you. Yeah, so one of the coolest things that I've learned about forestry is also a sad part, and that, like you said, the ships for the Queen's masts, or the mast for the Queen's ships, were the thing that impacted white pine. So that's where all the big white pine went. Then it was yellow birch was targeted for veneer for mosquito bombers in World War II, hemlock for subway squares, things like that. Now there are requirements that if you are harvesting, I can't really speak to Atlantic Canada because although I went to school there, I have not worked there, but in Canada on Crown land in general, you have to grow forest back a representative amount to what you harvested the type of. So if you harvest pine forest, you need to grow pine forest back because that's what's supposed to be there. So yeah, I can't really answer that question that clearly, but I know that in the past that was sadly the way that it worked, and now we're trying very hard to swing back to natural levels of those types of forests.
That's a wonderful answer to that question. I know one of our SFC personnel, Lyndon, he's a big environmental history guy, so I can feel he's like buzzing at those questions. Okay, I believe that about wraps us up for today. We're out of time, but Lacey, thank you so much. We really, really appreciate this.
Thanks for having me.
Alrighty, and thanks everybody else for watching. Take care, folks, and we will see you next Thursday.